Okay. Thank you all for joining us today for this alumni panel on multi-sector career paths within the environmental field. We have alumni with different degrees, different backgrounds, and it's just an extraordinary opportunity for us to get perspectives from people who are working in the field. So I'm going to ask each of the alumni to spend a few minutes talking about their current work in their career path, how they got there, their degree, and then we will open it up to questions. So Mike, I will have you start.
Okay, I'm happy to start. Thanks, Denise. Great to see everybody today, and thanks for joining. My name is Mike Weiner. I graduated with an MPA from GW Trachtenberg back in 2020. I was there from 2017 through 2020. I have been working in the clean energy and climate policy world for over a decade now. I started, as many young postgrads do, wanting to be an attorney. So I came to DC and started working for a law firm with the intention to study to be a paralegal, study for the LSAT, and go to law school. I found over time that that wasn't really the path for me. And as you are likely familiar, all the big law firms in DC have policy shops as well. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go over work on the policy side for a firm called Van Ness Feldman LLC, whose new offices are actually right near the campus in Foggy Bottom. And to go work on the policy side of the shop, focusing on the energy and environment space. With Van Ness Feldman, my first policy position, I focused quite a bit on lobbying in the trade association world. So I worked for primarily two trade associations that focused on decarbonization technologies, one in the carbon capture space and one in the hydrogen space. And while I was working in that role, that's when I started at GW, where I completed the degree program part-time while I was working full-time. In 2022, I moved over to Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy, which is a wind turbine manufacturer. That ultimately got fully acquired and integrated into Siemens Energy, its now parent company, which is a global energy equipment manufacturer that works across the array of energy technologies in traditional fossil power, renewable power, transmission, hydrogen, you name it. So my role involves a lot of working with both internal and external stakeholders on policy development, using a lot of the tools that you gain in the Trachtenberg program. And I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
Fantastic. Okay, Stuart, going from someone who's about to change jobs to someone who's been at their job for a long time.
Yeah, a really long time. So, hi, I'm Stuart Walker. I've been at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency since I started the same week I started my last class at GW when I got my MPA in 1987. So, since 1997, I've been working on how clean is clean for the remediation of radioactively contaminated sites. I work in the Superfund site program. I worked for a few years also in the radiation program. And I manage the development of risk assessment models, write a lot of guidance, or I've written a lot of guidance on the interpretation of different regulations and statutes for cleanup levels. Also work with the community involvement folks on ways to better explain how we're doing cleanup to people in the local communities at sites. So I started off actually as a reg writer. So my undergrad was also political science and econ, and I worked on the how to ban uses of asbestos under TSPPPA, which then we eventually that rulemaking, we cut corners, my bosses, then we lost in court. So I learned never to do that. And then I worked on how clean it, how to modify microorganisms modified by biotechnology methods. And after that, then I started working on site remediation. So, and I've been doing that, since 27 years right now. Just on pretty similar job though, but there's always new things to do because there's always new sites that come down the road and new guidance to work on.
Fantastic. Now we're going to go over to Ben.
Hey, thank you. And good evening, everyone. And nice work, Stuart, to be around that long, working with the EPA. I definitely respect that. But yeah, my name is Ben Schelk. I'm a program officer at the Ocean Foundation. It's a 501c3 public charity based in Washington, D.C. We focus on marine conservation. I lead the Blue Resilience Initiative, our largest program, which focuses on nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation and adaptation. Most of my work centers around coastal habitat restoration, seagrasses, mangroves, coral reefs, seaweeds, salt marshes, and also working a bit with sargassum seaweed to produce compost to be used in regenerative agriculture. Fundamentally, we approach these projects from a seascape perspective, acknowledging that they're all kind of synergistically connected. And if you want to really tackle this at a landscape scale, you need to not only think about planting things, but also about, the hydrology, the topography, all of these different things that affect the health or the, the status or the mortality of these coastal ecosystems. And we do this, for climate change mitigation to take CO2 out of the atmosphere, but also to help communities adapt, in vulnerable places around the world to become more resilient to climate change induced impacts, storms. We also have a lot of nutrient pollution, sediment pollution, all of these different things that are contributing to ecosystem decline globally. And it's really important when assembling these projects to involve the local community, make them the key stakeholders and decision makers in all of this. And getting back to GW, I have an MPA at GW. I actually have been working with the Ocean Foundation for nearly 12 years now. Started before that working with Alexandre Cousteau just to start my career. And although I have a science background, I have an undergrad in earth science, I am not a marine biologist, but I'm leading the largest, mangrove restoration project in the country in Puerto Rico, and have several other large projects, throughout the Caribbean, including in Mexico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and St. Kitts. So it's really exciting, like learning about how the government works, how to interact with it, how to manage nonprofits. Those are all these kind of skills that I acquired working full-time at the Ocean Foundation, but going part-time to school. And when you get to this kind of scale of project, it's not just scientists, it's not just academics. You have to involve a lot of different components because ultimately this is like a business, doing projects of this size that take tens of millions of dollars sometimes, and you got to think about carbon financing. So you're bringing in a lot of different components here, not just marine ecology or marine biology, but thinking about policy. Currently we're working with a K Street firm to, introduce legislation in Puerto Rico to allow the government to engage in the voluntary carbon market, a way that they can finance monitoring and, staff expenditures, et cetera. So it's like a really exciting mix of bringing all these things together in kind of an enterprise for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So happy to answer any questions. And thank you again for coming out tonight.
Fantastic. Stephen, we're going to go to you.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Stephen too. I'm currently a transportation planner at the City of Oakland Department of Transportation. So a little bit about my journey. I got my MPP from GW in 2013. Came to grad school in DC. I'm originally from California, from the Bay Area. Came to grad school, kind of thinking I would do something, maybe something loosely in transportation, maybe something federal, maybe, just stick around in DC for a while. I'd come off working on a congressional campaign, and come to grad school seemed like a good time to pivot into something closer to that, especially with all my friends kind of having luckily been able to keep their jobs and stay in their congressional positions. So came out to DC, and then while in grad school, around the time, kind of fell in love with all the new bikeway infrastructure that was coming up in the Washington DC area. The bike share system was pretty new. So that really was kind of like a formative inspiration for me to then led to an internship with DDOT, the District Department of Transportation, where I got to work on the bike share system a little bit and work on some bike planning. Also cut my teeth on what's called the development review process. So when real estate development comes through, they're also tasked with conditions to improve the public right of way. So sidewalks, crosswalks, those kind of things, even traffic signals. That eventually led to a role at the Montgomery County Planning Department, where I worked on the development of their bike plan. I think it was the first one in like some number of decades. So as a lot of Californians do, we eventually hear the call to come back to California. So I um, felt that draw when I moved back to the Bay Area. I got involved with a business trade organization called the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, that had particular expertise in working on ballot initiatives and campaigns to fund public transportation. So, that's kind of a nice dovetail with kind of where my career started off with working on a congressional campaign. Um, Worked on passing Measure RR in the Bay Area, which funded the Caltrain commuter rail with the sales tax. Um, that led to a role with the California High-Speed Rail Authority, which was a really fascinating job. The job I had right before this one, which at the time I felt like was a great mix of experiences from across my career, from policy to planning, and also involving transportation and politics. So in that role at the time, that the project was moving towards environmental clearance. So I really got a lot of whole lot of hands-on experience with CEQA. May have heard that term bounced around before, the California Environmental Quality Act. And fortunately, the project has moved on and passed environmental clearance, so that's a big step for them. They're in construction right now in the Central Valley. And then this position in OCDOT came knocking, and this felt like the right time to get back into what I felt like kind of where my heart was, like back in bikeway and pedestrian planning. So I use a lot of GIS in my job, geographic information systems. That involves a lot of maps, a lot of communicating with interactive tools, a lot of interfacing with the public, and also I think at the core of it is really just kind of a drive to make a intentional improvement to our cities. So I kind of carried over that thread from working in DC, working in Montgomery County, and that kind of energy about cities being kind of a incubator for policy and what we're able to do to help better residents' lives. So yeah.
Fantastic. It's great hearing about the local perspective, and actually from the local to back over to the global with Julia.
Yes, thank you, Denise. And it's really nice to be here, part of this panel. So thank you for the invitation and organizing this event. So in terms of my background, I feel like I come a little bit from the different angle, because before coming to George Washington University, I spent about 20 years in the private sector doing finance, banking, and some technology on the digital side. And I have to say that at that time I was in Boston, Massachusetts, but I had a pretty big exposure to the rest of the country as well, because I was traveling a lot and I was seeing a lot of kind of parts of our country from the business and finance perspective. However, in 2020, my family and I made the decision to come to Washington, D.C. In the beginning of the COVID time. And this kind of came with a realization that DC opens up a completely different perspective on really life. And so with this really big international exposure, but also a huge focus on government and policy and finance. I really had an opportunity to, to go back to school and learn more about climate and, energy transition and all the great things that were starting to really explode at that time in our economy and in our, society in terms of climate transition and energy transition. So I wanted to learn more about this, but not just from the books, but from the kind of the best and the brightest. And when I researched different programs, I have to say that I was very impressed with the environmental resource policy program at George Washington University and the quality of the education that I received there at the end of my second year degree, which I did full-time as I was working or full-time at the same time. It was just a truly life-changing experience for me. So, and I have to say that being mid kind of pretty much advanced in my career, I took this education very, very seriously. So I was in class with a lot of very, young classmates who were just starting their careers. And I was at first thinking, oh my God, what am I doing here? Like there is a lot of 21, 22-year-olds. Well, thank God I wasn't really like looking too old, right? But I came from a different perspective, really to learn to the classroom. And I took everything extremely seriously. So I literally, I was completely immersed into this kind of new area of energy transition and, climate finance and environmental economics and law, impact investing, something that was a little bit closer to me, to what I was doing before. And it really equipped me with a new set of tools and perspectives, especially through the policy lens, to come with the private sector experience and push it in a direction where I felt there wasn't really that many business people at that time. There were a lot of advocacy. There was a lot of, kind of policy focus, but I was bringing to the table the business kind of side of the experience. And that opened the doors for me to come to the World Bank, specifically at IFC, which is International Finance Corporation, which is a private sector, arm of the World Bank, to come in and offer what I really was doing the best, right? So to look at the kind of business aspect, how we can grow climate finance, energy transition finance. And at that time, the organization was growing its climate business footprint and looking how they can advance the kind of climate finance business of the organization. And we're talking about billions of dollars in terms of, strategy, what kind of investment opportunities we were looking, globally. And I came to help lead this effort and, was literally in charge of the climate strategy definition for the organization. So that was an amazing opportunity. And as my colleagues here were describing the, ecosystem management and, mitigation, adaptation, climate finance, energy transition, all of this stuff was part of that, World Bank or IFC, strategy program that we were designing at that time. So that was 3 years ago. And since then, I stayed with the organization in the climate/energy transition space. Right now, I'm focusing more on energy transition, more recently looking at, programs like green hydrogen, for example, or in general, how innovation can advance some of the programs that we are doing. And we are looking again at the global footprint, although a lot of innovation is coming from the United States, which is amazing. But then we're looking how we can advance this in the emerging markets. And so what also made a difference that as I was started to do more and more research and publications around this space, I got interested in advancing my education even further. So at this point, as of this year, I enrolled in the doctorate degree. And so I am pursuing right now a 3-year doctorate degree at Johns Hopkins University in international studies, and again, focusing on the climate and energy transition. Again, happy to answer any questions. If anyone has any comments or questions, please, do it alone.
Fantastic. Well, I could ask a lot of questions, but I want to open it up to our students who are here or alumni. If anyone wants to start, either you can type in a question, or if you want to raise your hand, or just, we have a small group here, so if you just want to unmute yourself. Abigail, we'll start with you. Fantastic.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I guess this is a question for those of you who have like pivoted in your careers. I work at a nonprofit right now doing environmental education, and I kind of want to switch to more environmental and less like education. And I'm just wondering if there's anything like experience or opportunity or resource at Trachtenberg that you found like particularly useful for making like a career transition specifically.
Well,
guess
I
really
think.
quick. Yeah, go ahead.
Please
Go ahead, Julia.
All right. So I wouldn't say that I did a classic kind of transition career change in my life, but in reality, that's exactly what happened to me, right? Because I was doing one set of things during my career, and now I not just switched my employer, but I also switched completely the type of activity that I'm doing, right? From commercial activity to, let's say, value or purpose-driven activity, even though it's still effectively in the private sector, although there is a huge context from the kind of policy perspective and, collaboration perspective across all the different organizations. So I say that going back to school is always an amazing opportunity to shape what you want to do kind of the best, right? So it's programs usually give you a set of, fixed curricula, fixed courses, that mandatory courses that you need to take, but then there is an opportunity to take additional electives. And those electives, they are really up to you, right? And what I would personally, based on my own experience, what I would suggest that it's nice to kind of be to get general knowledge across the board, right? But the best thing going into a degree, or at least in the first semester, if it's a 2-year degree, right? It's nice to think about what it is that you are the most interested in and shaping your set of electives around a particular area to gain deeper expertise in this area. So for me, specifically, it was around energy, financing, and investing, right? So it's those two things that I am doing the most right now. I'm very passionate about this, and I feel like building your expertise in something that is where you can apply going forward in your, in your professional career. This is very, very important. While you can learn on the job, it's nice to come with some confidence, to your future employer and say, I know XYZ, I'm very passionate about this, the set of kind of terminology to operate, and you can truly position yourself better for the future prospects.
I was going to
Just
ask what.
yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
I was just going to ask what part of environmental were you focused on, and what type of positions were you looking for?
I'm really interested in water in particular. I'm taking an elective about water management right now, so I'm definitely thinking about that. And I'm primarily interested in writing. I don't know what context that would be specifically, but that is, yeah, my primary skill and interest in terms of job functions.
The things like surface water, Clean Water Act type of things, or
Yeah, I'm
more
interested in like
more
water management.
yeah. You said you're in a nonprofit now?
Yeah, I work at an environmental education nonprofit.
Oh, okay. All right. So do you have has any of your experience also been in the area that you were thinking of trying to get more into? And or were you thinking more contractor, government, headquarters, state?
That's a great question. I've worked at the same nonprofit for 6 years, basically like most of my like professional life. So I feel like I'm definitely in the exploring opportunities phase of my understanding.
Yeah. I think Ben might actually have something better than me though.
Yeah, it's interesting because I going to school originally, I was going to become a limnologist, so lake scientist essentially, and looking at climate hydrology and all these different aspects. So having some knowledge about, like, it depends on if you're talking about nature-based kind of things or whether you're talking about wastewater management or municipal water management, more kind of traditional utility slash government, roles. But within the context of kind of thinking about like watershed management from a, more of a nonprofit perspective, thinking about monitoring is really critical. And so, one of the courses that really was beneficial to me was the M&E stuff, which was required, I believe, but I really, that was pretty critical, for my current job, and my future job. Understanding kind of where people were coming at from that perspective is going to be important. Like right now, I'm the chair of the board of a nonprofit called the Commons, which is kind of a tech nonprofit, but develops software to help, Chesapeake Bay practitioners kind of meet TMDL requirements. It's used by NIFWF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, exclusively to monitor progress on all NIFWF grantees in the Chesapeake Bay region as part of that program, the scorecard, the whole 9 yards, and that's some hardcore programming stuff and software, thinking about how to kind of tie all those pieces together. It becomes very technical, and sometimes you're not even dealing with scientists, you're dealing with coders and stuff like that. So M&E, I think, can start to bridge that gap. Stats too, statistics, like if that's an elective that's available in relationship to all this, very, very helpful as well. Just depends on if you want to be more kind of management high level, or do you want to be really technical, on kind of some specialized space within that sector,
Yeah, thank you so much.
Corey, it looks like we had a couple students who had emailed me directly that they had to get over to class. Corey, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I'm currently a ESP, or environmental sustainability policy major with Trachtenberg. So that was just switched this year from ENRP. But while I'm completing that degree, I'm also looking at obtaining my GIS certification, and I'm just wondering what is the best way to market myself when looking for jobs with that degree, with that certification.
Maybe I can take this on because I work with GIS really regularly. I mean, if you haven't already, and maybe you're still exploring GIS, start building a web page for a portfolio. Start putting together some apps or some basic maps, do some kind of analysis of something that tickles your fancy, of whatever it is you're trying to analyze. GIS is a broad world. There's so many things you can do with it, like everything from like developing like 100-year flood maps for a region, right, to like transit network planning, to I think even the military uses it, right, like in Afghanistan. Like I did like some kind of like GIS exercise when I'm getting a GIS certificate, and there was like an example of like determining like safe zones on the side of a hill, right? That's like safe from enemy fire, right? Like there's that kind of application. So it's like it runs the gamut on like what you can do. I mean, even my wife is at a conference right now with some cotton producers, and GIS can be used to like help determine like crop yields, like based on like sunlight and irrigation plans and stuff like that. So it's really versatile, but it's super broad. I think like the way to gain your competency through it is just to start interrogating questions that along the lines of things that you're interested in. I really envy the kind of GIS people who are generalists and are just like pros at the software, but don't really have any specific subject matter interest in it. They're just like masters at like the kind of people who use Excel without touching the mouse, right? There's keyboard only. There's people with GIS who can do that too. But yeah, you throw a problem at them, they can crack it pretty quickly. For me, it's kind of like it's got to be transportation focused, and that's kind of where I find my drive. So yeah, it's kind of like find the kernel of your motivation, build a portfolio, look at other projects that might be out there that might be interesting. Look into relational databases and getting a better understanding of that if you haven't already. That's a big part of GIS. So there's like some fundamentals of data analysis that are part of it. There's also the mapping side of it.
Yeah, I agree with Stephen. GIS is everything. Like in my field, everything is GIS and remote sensing and mapping. And, I'm a drone pilot and I do all that with, in the Commons, as I just mentioned, those are all their applications are GIS based. So, it's pretty much the center of a lot of conversation, and it's a great way to, just as Stephen said, as far as a portfolio is concerned, data journalism is kind of an approach where you use GIS as kind of an evidence, a series of maps. You know, I'm sure you've seen like the New York Times do that all the time, right? Where you have these interactive kind of things and you're bringing them through something. You can do that on, I think, Medium is a good way to do that. It's great to get out of, have something that shows your interests. As far as like job prospects, there are tons of them, obviously, but I would look into WRI if I were you, World Resources Institute. They're getting tons of money these days, hundreds of millions of dollars from Bezos and everyone out there. And a lot of their stuff is economics, environmental economics, GIS, data. Like that's all they do, and it's huge. It's a huge organization. It's growing up every day. So I highly recommend them.
Yeah, I was going to say I go to a lot of conferences where I hear a number of contractors and work on environmental issues who are using GIS and drones for mapping, surveying contamination. EPA itself has been lagging behind just basically because Congress banned us from using drones for years because they thought we were going to fly over and ban cows or something like that. But it was some weird reason. But they seem to have pulled back from it the last couple of years, so we're starting to get into it more ourselves. But yeah, it was we were probably one of the worst agencies in the world because of that, as far as using drones.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Other questions? I mean, we're at 2 of you, so I'm going to assume we're not going to do the breakout rooms, and I don't want to put you both on the spot since we just have 2 of you. If you don't, there's one question I will put out to all of you, and we could kind of wrap it up to that one. And I put for both of our attendees, you can see the link for their email addresses. And as I mentioned to our panelists, we had several students who indicated that they weren't able to attend today due to class conflicts, so we'll be sending out the recording. If you don't have any other questions, then I'm going to ask this last question because this is something that I struggle with, and I think about years ago I got to meet Jane Goodall, which was one of the most extraordinary things. And I asked her, I said, how do you not get overwhelmed by everything that's wrong in the world? And she said, you just need to find your piece of it. And I thought, someone who can see the world of environment the way that she has and still have that belief. So I will end on that note to ask each of you, how do you not get overwhelmed by everything that's wrong in the world? And how do you keep your hope up in the work that you all do around the environment? And I know that's a heavy question, but I think it's a wonderful way to wrap up for today. Stuart has unmuted, so I think he's ready to answer first.
Yeah, you focus on what you can get done. I mean, the agency deals with a lot of stuff at any time, depending on any administration or anything else going on. Part of it will be royally screwed up. But the thing is, though, is can you keep getting stuff done in the area that you work at? So I probably put together 8 risk assessment and other types of models, which is about as many as anybody we've had that deals with waste issues. And I still find ways to improve them and add things to them. I'm trying to right now get we have a real big focus on tribal exposures right now, so we're trying to add in another 70 plants and 30 or 40 animals that will help deal with tribal exposures that we've been researching for several years. I actually used 2 interns for part of the research effort. So there's always things that you can look at to try and improve. And I'd hate to look and at any point and say I'm still doing the same stuff today that I was doing 5 years ago on everything. So and just staying engaged with stakeholders, going to conferences, talking to people that work out in the field if you're at headquarters or vice versa, talking to the states, tribes, contractors. You can always find things that they're complaining about and wish that you would do a better job on, so that you have things that you can work on. So
I can add on something for me, and I think it's 2 things. One is to maintain the perspective and understand that progress takes time, and along the way you have to cherish the little victories. it does not seem like the folks on this call are interested in the sort of private government affairs space, but I think back on my career and the things that I've worked on, and we've had some pretty significant legislative accomplishments from a climate perspective over the past few years in the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. I was working on for the firm that I was working at the time. I was working on provisions that were ultimately included in the infrastructure bill back in 2014, and we would try over and over again, Congress after Congress, to get these provisions included into whatever legislative vehicle we possibly could, and we failed over and over and over again for 8 years until they were ultimately included in the infrastructure bill. And it's the same thing with the Inflation Reduction Act. Those are provisions that I and many of my colleagues in Congress and in the policymaking space from the private sector were working on for a long time. And it takes a really, really long time for the political climate to emerge where something like that can happen. But when it happens, I will tell you, it was one of the most impactful days of my life. To feel like I was one very, very, very small part of something that was accomplished that was good. So taking, again, trying to enjoy every moment, realizing that there are little victories that you have to embrace in order for progress to be made. That's the way that I try to look at it, because it is a huge challenge all the time. So.
Okay, I'll go next. So the way I see it also, and I fully agree with the previous speakers, by the way, I was thinking that I would start with like a kind of 3-step process, right? First is knowledge. Understanding the problem is the first thing, because when something is just thrown in front of you or in front of the society, right? Something as complex as the climate, change problem, for example. It's even though there is a lot of debate on the science and on the policy aspect of this, but understanding what this really means in terms of action is very important, kind of to take your time and to get enough information to figure out what the action is. And the second thing is action. So action is where you can adjust as you go, as you learn. And sometimes you start with one end, but you pivot as you go, as you learn more information. This is something that's very, very powerful. Collecting, through action, you can learn more and you can adjust. And finally, network or collective kind of ecosystem, because people cannot really solve a complex problem by themselves or even in one dimension. It's the collective action that we have right now from the policymakers, government, from the innovation perspective. The private sector that I represent is extremely important. We keep talking these days a lot about government or public sector and private sector solving complex problems together, because they have the collective resources, they have the collective knowledge, and we cannot look at one dimension in this society. So this is very important that, all the appropriate stakeholders are involved and they have focused on solving that problem. And then it will be not overwhelming. It will be actually a very interesting journey, and seeing the results is extremely rewarding.
Maybe I can go next just to answer that. I'm fortunate enough to work at the local government level, so seeing it's literally my corner of the world, and keeping that garden tended, and trying to make the change and manifest it, and the kind of projects that I'm fortunate enough to be involved on are on the order of maybe months or years. In my last job at California High-Speed Rail Authority, that project's on the order of decades. So, that's certainly a different thing. You have to kind of keep in mind different kind of milestones. But, the flip side of being in kind of a machine where there's, more implementation happening kind of at a rapid pace is I think to kind of wrap your head around it, right? Kind of, it's more about understanding how that machine works, and then to piggyback on Stuart's point, how to get stuff done effectively, and kind of have that be a sustained practice. So I think what I mean by that is, City of Oakland's it's hard to steer that ship. It's in the news. It's got its problems going on right now. But if you can figure out a way to do the simple things like how to spend money, how to issue a contract order, right? How to get stuff done that doesn't necessarily involve the work of more people, because the more inputs that you have, the more that can kind of start to slow things down. So the more capacity that you have and knowledge of how to operate within your structure and ultimately learn how to work the system that you're in. I think that's kind of like the biggest advice, is learn how to work the system so that you can get things done. And then in that way, you're able to repeat it at scale in a way that's sustainable, so that you're not addressing a whole bunch of one-off projects. I think this is the kind of biggest thing that I've learned from my manager and my mentors in my life, is that we spend so much time fighting off one-off items and energy, and maybe you learn a lesson out of that. But if you want to get stuff done in a repeatable way at scale and make a lot of change, yeah, you kind of have to learn how to work the system, kind of upskill within it.
All right, and I guess I'll round us off. Yeah, good old Jane. I love her. It's great working in this space too, is you get to meet people like that all the time, and they're absolutely incredible. But honestly, her advice, or her question, is probably more appropriate for me after doing a home improvement project than working in the environmental space. The motivation to go on. I just got done with a huge plumbing project, and man, I'm telling you, I got to dig deep, to get to the next one. But I guess from the environmental perspective, working in this space, yeah, look, it's existential. It's climate change. The scale of this problem is so substantial. Our carbon budget is completely screwed. And you can't just plant a tree, in every arable corner of the world, in arable land. It's more complex than that. It's energy, it's transportation, it's agriculture. And it is nature-based stuff, it's forests, it's coastal ecosystems, but it's only a piece of the puzzle. So I have no illusions that no matter how big my projects may get, it's still going to be a drop in the bucket, frankly, when it comes to the fight against climate change. So how do you wake up every morning and, face that reality? Well, I drink a lot of coffee. I live out in the mountains on top of, in the woods with my dog, and I plant spruce trees out here. And as mentioned earlier, every little thing counts, like these projects too, nothing that was worth doing is easy or takes a small amount of time, and if you're talking about restoring a landscape, yeah, sure, we'll do the hydrological work for the largest project in the country and in a few years, but to see this place come back, it will take decades. You have to have the patience and drive, and just recognize that you didn't work this hard to get to this place in your life, to acquire these skills, to let it all go to waste. You're ready. Everyone plays a part in this, and it's going to take a lot of people like the folks in this room to even begin to tackle the biggest issue of our time and of our species. So yeah, I don't know. I think I'm still trying to figure this one out, but every single day is a new day, and I'm internally optimistic despite all that we see every day, the impacts from the hurricanes, et cetera. It's tough, but you got to dig deep, and that's why we're in this field. So thank you.
I love that, Ben. That was an absolutely perfect way to wrap that up, and highly recommend. I have been slowly rereading the Book of Hope with Jane Goodall and Douglas Abrams. Highly recommend that. So as we all navigate this world that we all want to make an impact in. I thank you all tremendously. I thank the students for being here. It was wonderful to both hear the weeds of the work that you all do and why you've chosen that path and the vision and the hope. So I thank you all. so much. I thank the students tremendously. You all received their emails if you have follow-up questions. We won't go into the breakout rooms now because we have such a small group. I think everybody got their questions asked, but you can reach out to them. And just really, I say this over and over again, the Trachtenberg School alumni, you all inspire me and you give me hope. And I thank you so much for your time today.